Hey, I'm John, and about 2 years ago, I messed up big time. Here is why. Let's start with a bit of a backstory. So, my parents have been divorced for about 8 years now. I was 12 when they decided to get a divorce, and I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty hard for me. As an only child, I didn't have anybody to share my feelings with. My parents made it clear that they were always going to be there for me, but it changed my whole life after all. We were never going to do any activities as a family again, and just the thought of it hurt. Since then, I have primarily been living with my dad and staying at my mom's house mostly at weekends. I would often visit her when I felt like I needed to talk to her. About 3 years ago, my dad started dating a woman. I mean, he had been on dates before, but this time it seemed to be serious. They went out at least 4 times a week, which was unusual for my dad, as he has always been very busy with work. He didn't tell me at first, but I soon noticed how often he'd go out. Then, one day, he finally introduced me to her. I was kind of excited to meet her, because I noticed how much happier my dad seemed to be since he got to know her. He had invited her over for dinner, and told me he wanted me to join them. It was really important to my dad that I approved of his relationship. Obviously, I wasn't going to disapprove, considering how thrilled he was to introduce her to me. On the other side, though, I felt sad that he finally got over my mom. It might sound stupid, but deep inside, there was still a shimmer of hope that my parents were going to reconnect and get back together. I know, foolish of me to think that way, but I couldn't help it. I finally got to know her name, Isabel. The dinner went smoothly. She told us, well, me, a little bit about herself, and I shared bits of my own life too. She doesn't have any children and has never been married before. In fact, this is the most serious relationship she has ever had. We got along well with each other. She and my dad behaved like they were teenagers who were in love for the first time, which was kind of disgusting, but also cute. Life mostly went back to normal, with the exception of Isabel moving in about 2 months after me getting to know her. It felt like it was quite early for her to move in, but whatever my dad thinks is right. I felt really weird around her. I don't know why. She was nice, but maybe it was the fact that, at that time, a quite unfamiliar female moved into our house. My dad and I were not alone anymore after such a long time. I started spending a lot more time outside with my friends because I felt awkward at home. It wasn't her fault. I just didn't have as much privacy as I'd had before. And in addition to that, I felt confused after meeting a girl I developed a huge crush on. She occupied my thoughts. I could barely concentrate at school because I was thinking of her. Every time I was around her, I became very shy and quiet. I didn't know how to behave in her presence. Usually, I would have talked to my mom about it, but at the time, she was abroad for a business trip, and I didn't want to bother her. I considered talking to my dad. So, when he asked why I had been so deep in thought lately, I saw it as the perfect opportunity to tell him about my girl problems. I kinda like a girl, I told him. He raised his eyebrows, but motioned for me to keep going. She's a bit older than me, but she's really beautiful, and since the moment I have met her, I can't stop thinking about her. I told him while running my fingers through my hair. This was even more uncomfortable than I had imagined. I could see a small grin forming on his mouth before he told me how proud he was his son being in love for the first time. I told him that it wasn't love, that it was only a crush. I apologized to him and said that I couldn't talk to him anymore about this before rushing to my room to escape this short but painfully awkward talk. After that failed conversation with my dad, I decided to call my best friend. He already knew about my crush on this girl. I told him that my dad wasn't much of a help and that I was planning on asking her out. What if she laughs at me because I am younger than her? I asked him. Then she's not as mature as she seems to be, he told me. He had a point. I decided that I would gather all the courage I had, ask her out on a date, and see what happens. What could be the worst thing she'd say? I have never been on a real date before, so I felt kind of lost at the thought of having to plan a date. Maybe ask your stepmom. She's a woman, she knows what they like, my friend advised me. I don't know how to talk to my stepmom about this, I told him. I have never talked about my feelings with her before. After the phone call, I practiced how I was going to ask her on a date. In fact, I practiced for about a week before I was comfortable enough to say it to her face. Don't judge me, okay? I was mentally prepared for her to laugh at my face, or even slap me. But I wasn't prepared for a yes coming out of her mouth. I was so shocked that the only thing I could do was stare into her face with my mouth hanging open like an idiot. But before she was able to take back her yes, I told her how glad I was that she agreed. I gave her my address and the time that she should be at my house. For the next days leading up to the big day, my nerves were on edge. My dad noticed, and I told him that I had a date. I made sure that he wasn't home at the time, so we could have a bit of privacy. So, when the day finally came, I was nervous as hell. I prepared the dining table, put a nice tablecloth on it, and set the table with our nicest dishes. And, not to forget, candles and flowers for decoration. After preparing everything, I awaited the arrival of my stepmom. When she finally came into the dining room, I told her how glad I was that she could make it. As I confessed that there was an older girl I had a crush on, and I needed her advice on how to impress her. Isabel's face changed into a concerned expression. She started to tell me that she knows that I am talking about her, that she felt flattered, and what an amazing young man I am. But she is with my dad and loves him more than anything. And only then I realized how wrong all of this must seem to her. She then went on to explain that it is okay to feel the way I am feeling about her, and there is nothing to be ashamed of. By then, my head must have looked like a huge tomato. She informed me that she overheard the conversation I had with my friend on the phone about a week ago, and how she had already suspected that it was about her because of how weirdly I behaved around her. Before I found the courage to speak up, there was a knock at the door. Isabel asked who it was. My date, I answered. Clearly confused, she raised an eyebrow at me. I told her this is definitely not what it looked like, and that I invited a girl over that I'd had a crush on for a long time. I wanted to hear your advice before the date started, because Dad isn't the best at giving advice, I said. After listening to me, I could tell that her cheeks were now heating up, and she felt embarrassed about misreading the situation. She apologized to me, and I told her it was okay. After a few more seconds of awkward silence, I told her that she can go now. Neither of us really knew what to say, so she just nodded, grabbed her things, and walked out the door. I greeted my date and told her to come inside. After leading her to her seat, I apologized about her having to wait outside for a few minutes. I tried my best to impress her during the date, but my mind was only thinking about the fact that my stepmom thought I had a thing for her. Soon, my embarrassment took over, and I ruined everything I could. I almost spilled a drink over her at one point. My mind was so blank that I didn't know what to talk about. So, most of the date, we just sat there in silence, nobody saying a word. She often tried to start a conversation, but was soon shut up by my scarce answers. The overall tension was really uncomfortable for both of us. The date was cut short by her apologizing and leaving, with the explanation that she felt sick. Of course, I knew it was a lie, but I was just glad that she was nice enough not to hurt my feelings. After that evening, she never responded to any of my texts and ignored me whenever we would see each other. At first, I was frustrated and angry at my stepmom, but after a while, I moved and got over it. And this is the story about how I messed up a date with a perfect girl I really liked because my stepmother thought I had a crush on her. To this day, I still get made fun of by my friends, as well as my dad about it, when in reality, I think they should make fun of Isabel for misunderstanding the situation.